Video games often go through a lengthy development process and are, of course, made by a group of talented individuals. Despite the gargantuan effort that it takes to make one of these things though, there are times when these titles are unfortunate enough to be cancelled and forever lost, leaving fans pining over what could have been. With that in mind then, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 cancelled video games you wish you could play. Number 10, Tekken Cross Street Fighter. In the 2010s, the prospect of bringing together Street Fighter and Tekken seemed like a total treat. Two beloved fighting games uniting sounded like a worthwhile crossover, which made it kinda surprising when it was announced that there would in fact be two titles under this crossover banner. The first was the 2012 game Street Fighter Cross Tekken, developed by Capcom, which was closer to the Street Fighter 4 style with its 2.5D gameplay and art style. Its counterpart then would have been Tekken Cross Street Fighter, with 3D fighting gameplay and more realistic graphics like the Tekken series, while being developed by Bandai Namco. Sadly, series producer Katsuhiro Harada said that the game was put on hold in 2016, and with the release of newer entries in the Tekken franchise and Street Fighter franchise, the future of this game seems doubtful. For fans who wanted to see how the crossover would have gone though, Akuma's guest spot in Tekken 7 did show how the Street Fighter cast could have played in the 3D plane. Number 9, Uncharted Drake's Fortune Remake. Everyone laughed a hearty laugh when Naughty Dog announced that The Last of Us was being remade. After all, why bother remaking a game that's only 9 years old, is readily accessible, and already has an incredible modern-feeling remaster on the PS4? Well, you're probably not going to be surprised to learn that this actually wasn't the original plan. If a Bloomberg report is to be believed, the original studio in charge of the project, a new team made within Sony, actually originally pitched and fought to remake Uncharted Drake's Fortune instead. While that title similarly already has a remaster on the PS4 as well, it's a decidedly older feeling game, not even being of the technical caliber of its own sequels. Rather than remaking a perfect game then, the team would have been remaking a pretty good one, with plenty of room for improvement in both the mechanics and storytelling. As such, a full remake of Drake's Fortune could have been much more intriguing and wouldn't have had players squinting their eyes to try and tell the difference between what had and hadn't been changed. Ultimately though, the project was deemed too demanding, and Sony higher-ups thought The Last of Us, with it being more recent, would have been an easier thing to handle. Number 8, Aliens Crucible. Obsidian Entertainment is one of the leading developers in the RPG genre, with games such as Fallout New Vegas and Knights of the Old Republic 2 being fan favorites. And in 2006, the hitmakers set their sights on the Alien franchise with the game Aliens Crucible. The title was essentially described as the horror genre's answer to Mass Effect, and included squad-based mechanics which included dialogue options that would affect each squad member's loyalty to the player. You know, classic RPG stuff. However, there was a unique feature in the form of permanent death, which would occur when characters were face-hugged by aliens. Once implanted with the alien embryo, players would be given the choice as to whether to kill these characters out of mercy, freeze them in cryotubes, or just let the chestburster escape from their bodies. Whatever you chose though, impregnation would mean death and would whittle down the game's cast. Tragically, Aliens Crucible was canned in 2009 despite being nearly finished, and to this day the prospect of an RPG set in the Alien universe is untapped potential that surely would have done well thanks to Obsidian's impressive credentials. Number 7, Crash Bandicoot Worlds. Video game developer Mark Cerny has worked on plenty of beloved titles for years now, especially Knack 1 and Knack 2. Lower in his impressive list of credentials, though, are the Crash Bandicoot games, which, under Naughty Dog, helped propel the orange marsupial as the PlayStation's mascot. So, when it came time for the arrival of the PS2, Cerny intended to produce the game Crash Bandicoot Worlds after Naughty Dog had moved on. What was set to be a huge departure from the previous game, Worlds would have been an open-world platformer incorporating puzzle-solving mechanics as Crash traveled to different planets. And all that really exists today from this project is a 3D rendered demo by Traveler's Tales, which showed an ambitiously large volcanic planet, and the scope promised by this demo meant that Worlds itself would have been a huge leap for the video game series at the time. Sadly though, this project was canned due to Mark Cerny's falling out with Universal and Sony, and Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex was developed as a quicker replacement. Number 6, Fallout 3 Van Buren. Fallout 3 Van Buren was the intended third installment in the RPG series, and was going to be developed by Black Isle Studios under Interplay Entertainment. This team, of course, was responsible for the first 2 entries in the franchise, which featured a deep story while having isometric turn-based combat. And Van Buren would have followed suit, with the story opening in 2253 as the player would have been incarcerated in prison. Set in the unforgiving wasteland, the player would then encounter famous Fallout factions such as the New California Republic and the Brotherhood of Steel. By interacting and winning over smaller factions, players would then turn the tide of a war and choose which side to support. Though cancelled after the publisher went bankrupt in 2003, what's interesting is that a lot of these ideas actually did make their way over to Fallout New Vegas, which was developed by a lot of former Black Isle employees. So with this one, we kinda did get it eventually in a little bit of a remixed fashion. Number 5, Rocksteady's Superman game. In the wake of their incredible and hugely successful Arkham trilogy, you might have assumed that developers Rocksteady would have had the option to do whatever the hell they wanted. Sadly, that couldn't have been further from the truth. Instead, the team featured a bunch of pushbacks from their publisher, with a bunch of potential projects being canned. One of these, allegedly, according to reports, was Rocksteady's Superman game. Now, this was always assumed to be their next title, as the team is no stranger to teasing future projects in their game, and Arkham Knight famously featured a whole host of references regarding the Man of Steel. According to reports, however, this pitch was ultimately rejected, and instead the team was put on crafting Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League, which still does admittedly feature Superman, albeit as a villain. And that's such a shame. Rocksteady redefined Batman in video games, and they could have done the same for this long abused character. Number 4, the many iterations of Resident Evil 4. Resi 4, of course, revitalized the entire franchise and changed the third-person genre forever. But before we got to this point, there were many versions of Capcom's 4th installment that were prototyped and ultimately canned. The first version is called the Fog version, which saw Leon S. Kennedy tasked to infiltrate a castle while being hunted down by a supernatural power-giving black fog virus. This was scrapped, and the next version focused on the Hookman. Here, Leon would have faced off against, you guessed it, a Hookman, while also battling against new enemies that were supernatural in nature compared to the franchise's cast of zombies and lickers. From living dolls, moving suits of armor, and other apparitions, this was intended to take Resident Evil in a whole new direction. Finally though, we have the last version before the game we got, which was dubbed the Hallucination version. Though not much was revealed about this iteration, it would have made Resident Evil 4 scarier, with Leon going through the Spencer Mansion, I know, can you believe that, while experiencing, you guessed it again, hallucinations. Development problems, however, led to series creator Shinji Mikami stepping in to personally cancel this version. Though the final version of Resident Evil 4 is kinda the most perfect game ever made, its previous iterations all offered interesting ideas despite being cancelled. And while I wouldn't swap any of them out for the game we got, I would have wanted to see what a full version of these prototypes would have looked like. Number 3, Rockstar's Agent. Rockstar Games' Agent is one of many titles under the publisher that has been lost to time. Intended for the PS3, the game would have been set in the Cold War, and Agent itself was meant to be the next great franchise for Rockstar, and the developers Rockstar North had high hopes for it. Gameplay-wise, as the developers were well versed with stealth with previous entries such as Manhunt, Agent would have been the natural evolution of that style of gameplay, putting the emphasis on spy espionage. Unfortunately, there isn't much else to mention from the game other than the excitement of a new Rockstar franchise, as no gameplay was ever actually shown, and leaks have been very sparse over the years. Though no formal cancellation has ever been given, it was clear that Rockstar eventually moved on with Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2. Number 2, Star Wars 1313. Set between episodes 3 and 4, Star Wars 1313 starred Boba Fett, though this detail was omitted from the initial trailers. Gameplay-wise, the spectacular E3 footage that we did receive showed a much more action-packed Star Wars game that replaced this series' force powers with natural skill and athletic ability. Combat was a third-person shooter in the style of Uncharted, with a focus on gadgets and a huge arsenal of weapons. At the same time, there were cinematic gameplay events that put players in front of the action, with acrobatics and climbing, again, similar to the Uncharted games. It looked incredible, and its use of the Unreal Engine 3 still kinda holds up to this day, with graphics that looked incredibly impressive for the time, despite it being in development a decade ago. Of course, all of this promise came to an end when George Lucas sold Lucasfilm and its subsidiaries to the Walt Disney Company in 2013. Under new management, the House of Mouse ceased the development of all video game projects. Number 1, Silent Hills. Though no gameplay was ever actually shown outside of the PT demo, which apparently wasn't going to be fully representative of the final gameplay style, Silent Hills was set to be made in Kojima Productions' excellent Fox engine, with Metal Gear creator Hideo Kojima, Norman Reedus, and Guillermo del Toro all teaming up for what was promised to be a major revitalization for this flagging series. And if it was anything like that iconic playable demo, the final game would have delved deep into the series' signature psychological horror, while also being dripping with an eerie atmosphere. Del Toro even stated after the game's cancellation that they were going to be working with iconic manga artist Junji Ito, which, quite frankly, would have been so good that I kinda want to stop the entry right now before I get too depressed that this game will never come out. Though Kojima, Del Toro, and Norman Reedus reunited for Death Stranding, there hasn't been any announcement of a Silent Hill since we lost the scariest game that never was. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you still wish you could have played some of these games? And are there any other ones that were cancelled that you were gutted about? Let me know, and while you're down there, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.